Hamas has released the last remaining US-Israeli joint national held hostage since the October the 7th attacks. 21-year-old Edan Alexander, who was born in New Jersey, was serving in an elite infantry unit on the border with Gaza when he was captured more than 580 days ago. These are the scenes live from that border, the Israel-Gaza border. And we've also been looking at Hostages Square in Tel Aviv, where so many people are waiting for news. Hamas says the release of Edan Alexander is part of efforts to reach a ceasefire deal in Gaza and allow humanitarian aid into the territory. But the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says the 21-year-old's release won't lead to a ceasefire or the freeing of Palestinian prisoners. Well, let's go to our correspondent, Hugo Bashega, who is there in Hostages Square in Tel Aviv. Hugo, just tell us what's happening.
Yeah, Karen, so moments ago we had confirmation by the Israeli military that Edan Alexander has crossed into Israeli territory. He's back in Israel, and we're now waiting for the confirmation that he has been finally reunited with his family after being released. He spent more than 19 months in captivity. So there is a huge crowd here in Hostage Square in Tel Aviv, which has become one of the symbols of this hostage crisis. And many of the people who are here tonight are relatives of the hostages who remain in captivity in Gaza. And they have been seeing this moment as a moment of hope that this could mark the beginning of a new phase in this process to guarantee the release of the hostages who remain in captivity. And again, the release of Edan Alexander was only possible because of the negotiations that happened between the Trump administration and Hamas. There was no involvement of the Israeli authorities. And for many people here, this is an indication that perhaps the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is not really putting the release of the hostages as a top priority in these negotiations with Hamas. So there is the hope here that this could lead to negotiations for a comprehensive deal in Gaza that would see not only the release of the remaining hostages, but also the end of the war.
And Hugo, you mentioned that this came about because of direct negotiations between the Trump administration and Hamas and its representatives. The Israeli government says the release of Edan Alexander was due to relentless military pressure.
Exactly, and this has been kind of the official line all day, that this decision by Hamas was only possible because of the military pressure by the Israeli army. This is something that is rejected by many here in Israel, and for a very long time people have been saying that the Prime Minister is not really interested in reaching a deal with Hamas, that he wants to prolong the war in Gaza for political purposes. And it is very interesting that this decision by Hamas came amid reports of increasing frustration in the Trump administration with the positions of the Israeli Prime Minister in these negotiations. A key demand from Hamas in these talks is that any kind of deal in Gaza should involve the end of the war, which is something that has been repeatedly rejected by the Israeli Prime Minister. So we've seen these negotiations that happen between the Trump administration and Hamas, and many here think that if there is this frustration in the Trump administration, this could result in more pressure on the Israeli government to try to strike a deal with Hamas.
Hugo, what is the choreography of this handover? How much do we know about what is happening now and what is likely to happen in the coming hours?
Yeah, so what we've seen today is very different from what we saw earlier this year in the releases that happened as part of that ceasefire that collapsed back in March. There were no cameras, there were no public events, if you like, hosted by Hamas. Those releases were heavily criticized here in Israel. People saw that as another humiliation for those hostages who spent so much time in captivity in Gaza. Today, we saw Edan Alexander being handed over by Hamas to the Red Cross in Gaza. There was a picture that was shared here in the screen in Hostage Square, the first time that we saw him after his release, and now we understand that he is with the Israeli military. He has crossed into Israeli territory. His family is now waiting on a kibbutz in the south of the country, where he's going to go through some medical tests, and that's when he will finally be reunited with his family.
And what has he been through? Where was he on the 7th of October? What do we know about what has happened to him in the time since then?
Yeah, so this is an American Israeli hostage, 21 years old. He was serving in the Israeli military. He was in a military position when the Hamas attacks happened on the 7th of October 2023. He was taken into Gaza with as hostage. More than 250 people were taken captive during the attacks, and he was believed to be the last living American hostage being held in Gaza. And the decision that was announced yesterday by Hamas was described by the group as a step in these efforts for a comprehensive deal in Gaza. And again, we heard President Trump earlier today talk about the family of Edan Alexander, how they were very, very happy, in the words of the president, with the news that he was going to be freed. So again, the wait here continues for the first images and for the confirmation that he has finally been reunited with his family in southern Israel.
Hugo, thank you very much. Hugo Bashega there in Tel Aviv in Hostages Square, with so many families of the hostages waiting for that first news of Edan Alexander. Let's talk to Aaron David Miller, who's Senior Fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, was also an advisor on Arab-Israeli negotiations to both Republican and Democratic administrations. Aaron David Miller, good to see you again. I wonder what you make of this move and how it came about.
I mean, obviously, it reminds me of the human toll, the human tragedy, not just for the hostages and their families, but for the long-suffering millions of Palestinians in Gaza over the course of the last 18 months. I think it came about in large part by several factors. Number one, I think that the Trump trip to Saudi Arabia created a point of leverage. I think the Qataris, probably the Egyptians, who are more influenced with the internal leadership than the Qataris do, probably were pressing Hamas to deliver Edan Alexander. The issue of goodwill is irrelevant. This was done for a specific purpose. It was done to somehow forestall what is expected to be a large Israeli ground incursion once Trump leaves the region into Gaza. It was done to focus on the critical need of humanitarian assistance. And it was done to preserve what few remaining options Hamas has in terms of its own political coherence and survivability. It also capitalized on what I think is a growing frustration on the part of the Trump administration, his key envoys, Stephen Witkoff, and the president himself, for what I think they are increasingly convinced of is a pointless war from a security point of view that the Israelis continue to wage. Now, whether this hostage release of one individual represents a headline or a trend line is unclear, but the Israelis have now dispatched a negotiating delegation to Doha in Qatar to talk about the latest Stephen Witkoff proposal, which is 8 to 13 hostages in exchange for 45 to 60-day ceasefire. So we'll see where this goes, but I think those are the factors that are in play.
You used the word frustration. Has Donald Trump lost patience with Benjamin Netanyahu and his government?
Well, I don't think there's any doubt about that. I mean, Donald Trump may self-style himself as the most pro-Israeli president in the history of the world. But the reality is he's very transactional, extremely so. Unlike Joe Biden, who had a deep, deep, abiding feeling about the people of Israel, the security of Israel, the very idea of Israel. I don't think Donald Trump has any of that. I think he's a deal maker. And I think he now understands that any hope of ending the war in Gaza, let alone Israeli-Saudi normalization, will depend on getting the Israelis to do what they need to do in order to bring the war to a conclusion. I'm not persuaded, by the way, that Mr. Netanyahu, for whom politics and survival is the paramount and overriding North Star, will be able to do that. But I do believe Donald Trump has exhibited it lately. Separate deal with the Houthis, allowing his hostage negotiators several months ago to meet with Hamas two or three times. And this deal, which clearly caught the Israelis by surprise, suggests to me a degree of willingness to operate independently of Jerusalem. And having worked for a lot of administrations, Jimmy Carter to Bush 43, that is a rare sort of attitude to take for an American president.
Aaron David Miller, we appreciate your time. Thank you very much for talking to us together.
Thanks so much.
Now, the development comes as President Trump, as we were hearing, is on his way to the Saudi capital, Riyadh, to meet the country's de facto leader, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, in what would be his first international state visit of his second term. Let's go to Riyadh now and talk to our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette. Lise, ahead of this visit by Donald Trump, the handing over of the Israeli-American hostage, Edan Alexander, what does this signify in terms of movement in this whole process?
Well, that is the big question being asked tonight, not just here in Riyadh, but right across the region and in many capitals beyond. This is very good news. Good news for the family of Edan Alexander, for the families of other hostages their loved ones are still being held in Gaza. And good news, too, for a region, including here in the Saudi Kingdom, who are hoping that President Trump can make the difference when it comes to ending the Gaza war. And of course, this kind of headline is exactly what President Trump wants, as he's now in the skies heading to the Saudi Kingdom for the first stop on his first foreign tour. And joining me here in Riyadh is Faisal Abbas. He's the editor-in-chief of Arab News, the leading Saudi daily. Faisal Abbas, welcome to BBC News. We're hearing, of course, this news, another hostage, the American-Israeli Edan Alexander, just released, but Prime Minister Netanyahu is making it clear no Palestinian prisoners released in exchange, no moves yet towards a ceasefire. Is that how the Saudi leadership will see it when President Trump arrives?
Well, Liz, Netanyahu can say whatever he wants, but the reality is insanity is trying to do the same thing and expecting a different result. The leadership of Benjamin Netanyahu has not made Israel safer. It has actually made it much worse. We have not seen an end to hostilities. The situation has deteriorated. As for the Saudi position, it has been crystal clear that the only way forward is a two-state solution. This is not just a condition for Saudi peace talks with Israel on behalf of Saudi Arabia and the rest of the Arab and Muslim world league, but it's actually the best guarantor for Israel's safety. So it's in everybody's interest. The problem is you are dealing with a government that does not want to listen to reason. So again, he can say whatever he wants, but the reality is we hope that during the visit, President Trump could listen to different points of views and see it the way the Arab world or the Muslim world sees it, which actually serves American interests and Israeli interests, but perhaps not the interests of Benjamin Netanyahu himself, who wants to stay in power at whatever cost.
Do you think this is going to be one of the main focus in these talks here in the kingdom? Because there's also this Saudi investment forum. We understand some leading business people from the United States are on that plane with President Trump. What would you say is the main priority for the Saudi kingdom?
Well,
we apologise. We have lost the line to Riyadh there and Lise Doucette. We will try to get Lise back if we can. But